Peace and blessings all. It's December the 25th, the year 2018, and I've got two long letters here from Kurt Johnson, who is a cellmate of Schaefer Cox and Russell Landers in the Terre Haute, Indiana prison. This is the same prison where Robert David Neal was murdered by Muslims on November the 10th of 2018. There was also a second murder of an individual named Famietta, I believe. And he was murdered as well in Terre Haute, Indiana just recently. And so you've had two recent murders in this prison, or at least one murder and one death. We don't know the details about the Famietta death. And I blame the warden, Warden J.R. Bell, because he must be, you know a man by his fruits, and he must be an ungodly reprobate on a fast train to hell, with a heart like a septic tank. But as you guys know, they have banned me from communicating. When I say they, I should say Warden J.R. Bell and Warden B. True. Both of those people, if you can call them people, have banned my wife and I from communicating with anybody at Terre Haute, Indiana, or Marion, Illinois, the illegal secret hellhole prisons. But there's a friend of mine that does communicate with Kurt Johnson, and he got a couple letters back, and I will scan these letters and put them up on Kurt Johnson's Dropbox. They'll be dated today, 12/25/18. And as I'm reading these long letters, you can stick around and hear the letters with me, or you can go download the letters from his Dropbox. That Dropbox location is on Year of Jubilee, Jubilee spelled with one E. Go to List of Other Prisoners and go down to J. It's all in alphabetical order by last name. Go down to Kurt Johnson, click on his Dropbox, and look for the file, the PDF file that's dated today, December the 25th, 2018. Also, I need to say that they banned his wife. They won't even let Kurt Johnson's wife communicate with him, which is satanic. Also, if I get interrupted, I see that Mike Parsons is online at the Oklahoma County Jail, Grady County, Oklahoma. So it's possible as I'm reading this, he might actually initiate a home wave call. I've got about 9 minutes left on his home wave. So if that happens, I'll just pause it. I'll talk to Mike and then I'll come back. But if you want to hang around, here we go. Dear XXXXX. Of course, I have to black out the names because if the prison ever finds out who the letter was written to, they'll ban those people too. It's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, this was written on November the 26th, 2018, so it's nearly a month in getting to me. The CMU as a closed society is a micro culture. Even with 40 guys or less, we have the same global elements because of the government controls imposed for this experiment. The Muslim violence, the Christian martyr, the terroristic clash of worldviews has reached inside our microcosm. For this reason, I can extrapolate that these lived realities for those who have yet to feel the touch of this personally, though they are witness to this cultural invasion encroaching on all sides. Who are the Muslims, and do they have any useful purpose in God's sovereignty? If you take God at his word, as I do, then the scourge of this violent religious gang and their atrocities throughout their history cannot be an accident. God gave mankind free will, so there is no doubt that this religion was a product of corrupt human hearts. Man should never be so arrogant as to assume his free choice can usurp God's sovereignty or providence. The scriptures tell us in Ephesians that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Muslims are a flesh and blood virus on global societies, but their purpose, existence, and significance all reside in the realms of demonic influence, a realm that is permissive. I'm going to pause here and remind you guys that Kurt has just seen his Christian friend, Robert David Neal, brutally murdered in the CMU in Terre Haute, Indiana. There is discussion that they could have beheaded him, but I don't know that's true or not. Job makes this clear. So here they are in history breathing threats, terrorizing, and killing mostly Christians and Jews because these worldviews claim an exclusivity to truth that competes with and precludes their claim of exclusivity. Violence and extermination is their remedy because conversion of these infidels is infinitesimal. No Christian who actually knows Christ could ever be duped by such a blatant fraud, and the Jews, having been scalded in God's furnace of 2,520 years of Levitical 7 times punishment for their idolatry, are firmly fixed on Yahweh, even though they have missed his salvation in Yoshua. Muslims do not have a heritage as long or substantive as the Judeo-Christian faith. They are the new kids on the block. How does the Christian deal with this asinine violence? Do we return violence for violence? This is a question directly relevant to me today in my subculture. Do I let my brother rest in peace without any vindication or retribution? My answer, because it is God's way, translates to your world also. If I were governed by my flesh or even prison rules, eye for eye would be dictated. But what transpired in the flesh had spiritual origin. Nothing in the power of flesh can undo the tragedy. But as I shared with you earlier, that's enough. Addressed the second murder in real time and gained a victory that transcended the world of Christian and Muslim men. It entered the heavenlies of supreme divine authority and suspended the realm of demonic. This is the weapon of our warfare. No Muslim has any tyranny that can resist it. You might ask, why did David have to die, or why 9/11? I think he's talking about Robert David Neal. These questions can find mature answers in the pursuit of intimacy with Christ. If it was allowed by Christ, there was good cause. He also allowed another to live. The full wisdom of this choice will be learned one day. For now we accept our sorrows and our confusion with hope. But that leads us to another question. Do we as a culture or as a Christian just sit around like sitting ducks and let terrorists pick us off at their whim? The question has no faith or understanding of God's kingdom. It is God who gave these terrorists their existence. He gives them the ebbs and flows of war among flesh, but not without purpose. Let's look at their beginning and see if their purpose is revealed. I think knowing this will convert our fears to faith. Seeing God's providential control of the things that can scare us brings an unshakable joy. You will see that Muslims are a necessary evil for the completion of history. Their recent rise, a sure sign of Christ's imminent return. The Muslim religion has been around 1400 years and will cease to exist in about 30. We are at the end of a dying thing, its death being the just reward for its life. Their ancestry preceded their religion. It is because of their ancestry they adopted this religion. Ishmael is given his destiny in Genesis 16:12. A wild-ass man is also a distinction used in Scripture for a sinner. Anyone who's dealt with these beasts know they are stubborn and rebellious for no good reason, a perfect type of the sinner. The law also has a wonderful salvation type in it for this beast, the sinner. Exodus 13:13. If not redeemed by the blood of a lamb, it deserved a broken neck. Ultimately, this is God's plan for this people and their religion. That's the law. However, we know that grace abounds. We as Christians must be agents of grace while the blood of the lamb is available. It is God's providence to break their neck. I believe these next 30 years are the greatest opportunity for Muslim conversion in answer to prayer. Iran is a capsule of the whole opportunity. It is a radical in doctrine and violence, a haven of the worst case scenario for Christianity, yet now has the fastest growing church. The timing of this is holy. Jeremiah 49 prophesies a coming tragedy to Iran. Something like a nuclear accident or a giant earthquake is about to rock this nation, creating a dispersion and refugee crisis. According to my understanding of prophetic timing, this should occur before the end of our next presidential term, 3 to 6 years from now. As a precursor of grace, God is leading many Iranians to Christ through dreams and visions. Though missionary work is limited, God is not. His access to this people is direct. This is preparation for when God cripples this mullah government with overwhelming tragedy. During this brief dispersion window of opportunity, God will have done his inner work to make hearts ripe for harvest and prepared his church for his divinely created missionary opportunity. The terrorists will have their onesies and twosies of success, but the church should bear this martyr sacrifice with patience. I am sad to lose David, but I can only envy his current state. He tragically had to suffer the pains of a violent death for a few minutes, but for eternity suffering has ceased. We can afford these kinds of losses while God orchestrated his harvest of millions. This is only a one-plot example. God is at work in all Muslim countries. The suffering the church is trading for, the glory ready to appear, is a small price. Back to Ishmael. I once knew a Lebanese man who was contentious about everything. When I called him out on it, he said, "You don't understand. When I have no enemies, I fight with my family." This really showed to me the prophecy for Ishmael was active. Can you imagine a state where you'd need war just to have peace in your own family? Only Ishmael's descendants can know this. It is no accident these people developed a religion fit to their disposition. Their infighting is a governor on evil and blessing to the rest of the world. Much like a Babel situation from Genesis 11. War and fighting is God's hook in the mouth of their soul by which God is leading them to their demise. Judas didn't have to hate Christ, but he did. And for that necessary reason, he was chosen. Ishmael's descendants didn't have to hate Isaac's promise, but because they chose to God, chose them for an evil purpose. Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and soon Iran will all be in turmoil. Syria will never again have the borders it had just a few years ago. Damascus will fall. Out of all this political turmoil, Christ will bring salvation to millions. From this, the Antichrist will restore political stability out of the formation of a 10 Arab League confederation. After the spiritual revival of Christ, leading to the salvation of many, the political revival will lead to the demise of hundreds of millions. This is the way of grace to provide substantive opportunity for salvation before the demise of judgment. In the 600s, there was a major eruption, I believe, in Italy. I can't quote accurate history from my memory on lockdown, but your access to information, you can easily verify this volcanic explosion. At this time, Muhammad was a local thug merchant on a barren trading route. The eruption globally changed the weather. The northern hemisphere was under ash cloud and devastated. The territory of Muhammad became an economic boon, a fertile crescent. Almost all south to north commerce went through Muhammad. This was his exposure to Judeo-Christian beliefs. He studied these doctrines and tenets, and in heretical fashion plagiarized the worst of each to form Islam. He understood little of each but respected their influence. Now that he had economic influence, he adopted his religion for political influence. He resorted to the scimitar and violence to advance his influence. He was a scoundrel of a person and died being poisoned by a widow of his violence. If it were not for the economic and political influence of the moment of his religion would not have long survived him. God gave the providential economic boon just so it would birth this terrible religion. God inserted the Shia and Sunni split immediately. Thank God for infighting. Their violent spread advancements were a particular plague on Europe. Basically, they infected the providence of Rome in the vacuum after their fall. This was the rim of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Then they would spike up into Europe on various blitzes. Spain suffered the most for a couple hundred years. Christians suffered miserably for hundreds of years with slavery, rapes, and murders, 100 times worse than today. Ultimately, the Crusades reset the balance of power, territories, and influence. They were mostly a barbaric tribal culture and cannot compete with the technological advancements of Europe, so they pretty much stayed in their place, mostly fighting with each other. But their hatred for the sons of promise, the sons of Isaac, Saxons or Anglo-Saxons, only awaited their next opportunity. Along comes oil. This economic boon fueled old flames and ignited their dormant hatred. Again, if one really studies the history in detail, which I am only touching cursory, they cannot but notice God's hand and perfect timing. The greed of oil, the Shia-Sunni split, the Ishmael temperament, the restoration of national Israel, and the second coming of Christ are all interwoven to bring the nations of the world to Armageddon and Psalms 2. Still, with this orchestrated march of wicked nations, God has not forgotten a sea of desperate people oppressed by these regimes. Let us not get caught up in the props of politics and be spiritually astute for God's opportunities. Even the worst of human society, God is faithful to with His grace. No doubt they are enemies and dangerous with their demonic, murderous influence, but we belong to Christ. They are no threat who can take the life of one already dead. Be bold, be strong, and courageous. Our vindication of our few losses is many coming to know Christ. Because of the times, their infection must spread, not so much to Britain, ourselves, and the West. They are near their peak of influence here. There will be an overplay of their hand, and even Britain will expel many. Spain will likewise recoil, not wanting to relive the horrors of their past, and will leave the EU. Out of the 10-nation confederacy, there will be a civil war after about a dozen years. 3 nations will fall. I believe Saudi is one of these 3. Inside these units, the Muslims are a menace. They invade the sanctity of your life on every front: sleep, sound, food, privilege, morals, and peace. They are pervasive invaders of all. This microcosm is a fraction, a true fraction in type of the whole. I believe God will use this fraction in the near future to give hope to His church about what He is doing on the whole, and how through a little suffering and death comes much life. I hope to continue my report. Amen. Kurt Johnson. All right, that was the first of 2 letters. And we're going to read the second letter now. All right, this was written on December the 13th, so it's after the first one, and written 12 days ago. Note, CTU and Associates, the use of your criminal mail system by necessity is not acceptance, and no claim of injury is hereby waived. The lockdown has been good, a sweet time of communion with the Lord. In this time, I've been able to reflect upon my history. This should be a regular habit for God's children, because a revisit with hindsight allows you to see God's providence. If I just go back 12 to 18 months, my frustration peaked and aggravated by what seemed senseless and unnecessary delays and hardships. There were betrayals, disloyalties, neglect, and opposition, all nurturing injustice. God does not need me to save a man's life, but since He chose to, I can now see how every nasty turn was necessary to put me at a certain mark in history. Just going back to my trial in September, I could not slow it down. Oh, I had many, many ways to do so, but had no liberty to employ them, being warned by God not to. Without the betrayals, I would not have done the things that would bring me to the trial and ultimately transferred. Instead, I could still be at Marion hearing of the tragic murder of my friend. Instead, we are reconnected by God and able to advance a cause of God together. Truly, our friendship is a two can put 10,000 to flight. He has some gifts I need to reach my full potential, and I am likewise endowed. His death would have been a catastrophic spiritual loss to me. I really got the opportunity to save my own life. When God does give a man an opportunity to save his own life, it adds a credible sanction to the life and promises saved. Because of these events, my victory has taken a giant leap towards me. I will learn in just 2 weeks if I will get to make my own leap. If so, I think by February 1st I will know that my prospects of an exit are substantially improved. This rapid development was not available to me at Marion. I had options, but these were all the ones being frustrated. By my wife's birthday, which is the 27th, I will have a good feel that I will be at her next one. Even in this retrospective, the nonsense of my marriage and our communication disconnect is finding its place in the providence of God. There are certain things that cannot be resolved between us except face to face, so the improved prospects of an exit brings with it additional hopes. Even though great leaps are advancing toward me, making March through April potentially realistic, I still believe these are the backup plans and that I'm seeing in my spirit is primary and sooner. This primary is not like the backup, which has pieces falling into place. The primary has pieces falling into place, but none of these can be seen. I will only learn of these events after God reveals, which will come suddenly and in an instant. It is like the rapture. We all know the promise is active, and though we don't know that day or hour that reveal, we show us how all the pieces were always falling into place. Of course, I prefer the primary because it is more specific to the prophecy spoken over me. With God being so attentive this year to distinguish me in prophetic history, I have to lean my hope in a continuing expression of the divine. That reveal, if it should appear, is not something I will have to write to you because it will have a very public expression. I learned when I got here that one of the tools I thought I needed to inherit as part of my victory, this was disappointing for a moment until God's reasoning was explained to me. This would have been a very powerful weapon useful. A very powerful weapon useful to the kingdom. But if I could use Samson to explain myself, I think my situation is kind of like his revelation. My calling does not end in death like his, but it does end in an exponential victory like his, probably until God put him in between those two pillars. He thought an ass's jawbone was a great weapon, but God had greater. Though I was disappointed the greater had replaced it with, truly made my hope in that weapon obsolete. This new one is vastly different, but potent in far more areas than money. Spiritually speaking, not every advantage can be purchased with cash. Sometimes you just have to be at the right place at the right time. Sometimes money has to play catch-up. The new weapon is 10 years ahead of the spirit and of Antichrist. This is so cool that you would faint with glee if I could share it with you. I can assure you that as soon as God revealed it to me, I immediately knew which prophecies it would fulfill. I also have to tell you, when you see God marching history to the fulfillment of his promises, you are encouraged in your personal prophetic promises. Surely moving the world is more difficult than moving the pieces of my life. I am growing weary of the abuses to my family. One has to balance a righteous anger through the temptations of revenge, bitterness, and hatred. Righteous anger is justified. Everything else is sin, and therefore not an option. I hope few will ever know the kind of vindictiveness, wickedness that this criminal enterprise heaps upon its victims daily. Keeping a right spirit is a daily, if not momentary, concern. I can understand their defending themselves against me and punishing me as they see fit, but to abuse my wife and parents is outside warfare to me. I don't think any of them will enjoy the collateral consequences of making this choice when they are revealed. I can suffer as any soldier. It's part of war. I do so without complaints or pleas of mercy from my enemies. Will God take away mercy as they have done when he turns the tables? They never consider this possibility in their cruelty. God has his own righteous anger. I will align mine with his, but I know God, and they are playing with fire, thinking he being slow to anger and patient in his actions, that he does not notice. He has captured every one of my tears. He can level a very informed indictment when he brings his charge. I'm already seeing signs, overt signs, of the cover-up of this murder that they are trying to fashion. They're trying to cover up the murder, if you didn't just catch that. God takes great offense to this also. There is no remorse, let alone repentance. How far they have fallen from humanity. They are just like the murder in that they have lost the sanctity for life. They may not stab you with an ice pick, but they will rend your heart by cutting off your loved ones. They steal, lie, and cheat in any way they can to self-authenticate their own narrative of events. My conviction is all self-authenticated propaganda. The evidence of my innocence at all cost cannot reach my hands by their censorship efforts. Then, when they have successfully denied me, they justify all their criminal acts by saying he couldn't prove it. The courts are in on this exercise. I would like to know someday why the government coddles and nurtures these radical Muslims. This murder was a conspiratorial hit, and in a fully recorded unit. You don't know this? Wow. Okay, I've been saying this even before I heard anybody at the prison write this. Let me read that again. This murder, talking about Robert David Neal, was a conspiratorial hit, and in a fully recorded unit. You don't know this? ? Of course they do. But a Muslim conspiracy is harder to cover up than a lone wolf wacko. This place professes their wickedness and lawlessness by the way they conceal. They hide in shadows, knowing they could never survive the scrutiny of light. I stop ranting. I've enclosed a response I received from the Library of Congress. I got from Rudy, and what I received from the Clinton Library. Maybe the new and improved facts you or your friends can locate the treaty. Clinton's staff worked on that treaty in 1992, adding 3 pages of amendments. Clinton probably signed it in 1993 or 94, most likely 93. Maybe with links and the facts you'll have success. The treaty was 18 pages and grew to 21 under Clinton. I hope this helps. Thank you so much. God is ministering to me a good revelation. I'll write about it in the next letter. Be blessed, and thanks for lending your ear. In Christ, Kurt Johnson. And then we have a letter from the Clinton Presidential Library. And I'm going to read this letter. I don't even know what's in it, but it says Clinton Presidential Library, has an address, Little Rock, Arkansas. It's to Kurt Johnson. It's dated December the 3rd, 2018. Dear Mr. Johnson, thank you for contacting the Clinton Presidential Library concerning your request for a copy of the International Administrative Private Remedy Process Treaty that was signed by President Clinton in 1992. The Clinton Presidential Library houses documents that were created during the Clinton administration, which dates from January the 20th, 1993 to January the 20th, 2001. That the particular treaty that you have asked about would not be housed in our archives. You may wish to use the keyword search Clinton Digital Library online for related information. For example, an online search for private remedy produces 22 results. Since we are not able to assist with this specific treaty, you have also requested a list of all treaties President Clinton signed during his first term. President Clinton's signing of treaties would be documented online in the archived presidential White House websites. And then there's a website that's given. Also, the State Department may be of assistance in providing the treaty text. Here is more information on the State Department and finding agreements such as treaties. And then it's signed the reference staff. There appears to be a letter that was also sent on December the 11th. Today, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous opinion in the cases of Victor Stitt and Jason Sims. I know this is a case of many you have been waiting on. And it's a bunch of legal stuff. You guys know I don't get into legal stuff. If you want to read all this legal stuff, you can go to Kurt Johnson's Dropbox. All right. The most significant thing for me as I read that letter was Kurt Johnson said that it was a conspiratorial effort and that the authorities at the prison, which would include the warden, knew very well what was about to happen. So, like I didn't know that already, but it's good to hear Kurt confirm that. All right, these wicked doers will get what's coming. Warden J.R. Bell and Warden B. True. God sees every single thing that you're doing. He notices every decision that you make, and your fruit is very, very rotten. And God is angry with the wicked every day, and God hates the workers of iniquity. Thank you for your time.